The story begins with a guy named Dorian asking the main character why she is avoiding him and asking her not to leave. Liana asks to let her go because she has to go. Dorian tearfully asks the girl if he disgusts her. A guy sometimes innocently dropping tears and sometimes looking with the eyes of a monster intent on getting what he wants, and he was the main character of this novel. The protagonist remembered that they were now in prison. At that moment, a prison employee approached the girl and said that there was an urgent delivery to her. Liana felt cold and opened her eyes in an unfamiliar place and was shocked that she was in a prison cell and could not understand what was going on here. The girl thought about what her reaction would be if one day suddenly she woke up in a prison cell and assumed she would think it was a dream. Unfortunately, the reality was that everything that was happening was not a dream. And after a while, she realized that she was trapped in a book and was in a TV character she didn't even know. Usually, settlers start their journey with luxurious beds, but the protagonist woke up on a prison bunk for some reason. In the end, Liana almost accepted her fate, but still she couldn't understand how she'd gotten displaced specifically in a tragic 19+ novel. This novel, with the most positive reviews, begins with the main character Francia being responsible for her father's actions and therefore going to prison. She has always been through an innocent but curious lady, and one day, carefree, secretly walking the corridors of the prison, Francia went deep into the territory. There she met one single prisoner, and this man turned out to be the protagonist, Heinrich Dorian von Hell. The ducal family of Hell has a power that is passed down from generation to generation. People from the family that are unable to match this incomparable power are sent to Cambrecum prison and are not allowed to leave the prison walls until someone is born who can withstand the clan's power. This power gives unearthly strength comparable to the power of monsters, but deprives the bearer of reason. The protagonist, having heard his story, decides to free the prisoner from his shackles, and as soon as he is freed, he turns into a monster. At one point appears sexy to the creeps, the main villain, and so begins the arc of a cruel love triangle. The protagonist has a difficult character, and the villain is a minor character, though he is not inferior in stubbornness. The families of the protagonist and the villain are feuding, and they will also display this love triangle. So, back to where we started, which is Cambrecum prison. Liana sat at the table and played poker with Hans, who was a prison guard, and then looked at one of the cells and thought about the fact that here is a cell in which the main male character is. Now the protagonist understands why in the beginning she was shown the main character as evil and the environment around would darken anyone. Suddenly, Liana cried out that she had won the game with Hans. Hans couldn't understand how a girl could play poker so well. After that, Liana handed the prison guard a bottle and said that even though she had won, she would still get the reward, and asked him to let her come here more often. In the central part of the prison there are a lot of nobles, so all the guards here are knights. Henry Dorian in the novel was very dangerous, so he was under strict surveillance. Until the plot starts, the guards are very malleable, and so it is very easy to placate and learn something. At this point, the protagonist asked Hans for a favor. Liana asked to see what was in the prison cell where nothing could be seen. The prison guard said that there was no way she could look in there. Liana looked at him with a pensive look, and Hans asked not to look at him like that. The prison guard said that the keeper would be coming soon, so she couldn't look into the cell. At that moment, the protagonist handed the guard a pack of cigarettes, and Hans was very happy about it, so he allowed the girl to look into the cell. Liana was happy that her plan worked, and took the keys and went to open the cell. Hans asked her where she got the high-quality liquor and cigars from, and Liana answered that her brother sent them to her. The protagonist walked to another part of the prison and noticed that it looked truly intimidating. At that moment, she saw Henry, who was lying on the floor sleeping. Liana admired his incredible beauty, and after a while, he woke up and saw the girl. When Henry saw her, he squatted down and started barking like a dog. Liana was surprised that the very curse in which he turns into a beast actually turns him into a puppy. The protagonist noticed on his neck a restrictive seal that was mentioned in the book, and when the girl wanted to touch it, Henry suddenly got angry and wanted to attack her. Fortunately, Liana defended herself with her magic and created a wall that prevented Henry from harming the girl. The protagonist didn't expect such a thing and realized why he didn't have a chain on him. It was just a magical chain. Liana did not help to understand why Henry suddenly became so aggressive, because she just reached out to him. At that moment, Liana heard Henry barking, and she decided to calm him down and distract his attention. Suddenly, the girl saw a stick near her, which Henry took in his mouth and did not want to give it back. The protagonist could not even think that he would immediately grasp the stick with his teeth. Liana decided to see if Henry understood her, so she took the rubber band off her hair, which had 2 soft pom-poms. The girl asked Henry if he knew what they were, and he was interested in them, and let Liana take the stick out of her mouth. After that, Henry took the girl's hand and started to bring it to her mouth. The main character tried to stop him because she realized he wanted to bite her. Henry didn't listen to Liana, but still suddenly he stopped and asked what she did to him. After that, Henry started to crawl back, and with tears in his eyes, he said that it was Liana herself who took hold of his hand, and he had never bitten anyone before. The protagonist couldn't understand what was going on here, and after Henry calmed down and said that it was the first time he had done that, and that's why he was surprised. Liana thought about whether he becomes like this after every time his sanity returns, and apologized to him. Henry was touched by this because no one had ever apologized to him. Liana took him by the hands and said that the first place is not important, because as soon as someone kinder comes along, such a small thing will be forgotten. And it doesn't matter that this is the first kind gesture because there will be many more in the future. The protagonist saw Henry's embarrassment, and changed for that she grabbed his hands and asked him if he understood what she was saying. Henry wanted to say something, but the prison guard said that Liana already had to leave. The protagonist wondered how long Henry had been here in this dark and gloomy place, relying only on the faint light coming from the corridor. Liana decided that she would come back to see him, and she wished she could see his face as she left. But the light from the candle was not enough to see anything. A servant came running to the keeper and told him that one of the cells had been broken into by a criminal of special danger. The keeper assumed that the guards had not been attentive enough, and at that moment, the servant handed him a letter. The keeper ordered him to go immediately and find out who was so brave as to decide to break into the cell of a high-danger criminal. Liana sat and thought about the fact that the more she looked into it, the more surprised she was, for this place barely reminded her of a prison. But still, it is a prison, and it should not be forgotten that the bulk of people here are nobles, and therefore the conditions are appropriate, although they are not available to everyone. Here there are unusual dishes and desserts, walks and favorite hobbies, and in her head there is some dissonance, because despite the room, everyone is dressed in prison uniform. At that moment, Liana heard a conversation between 2 girls, one of whom was holding a perfume from a new collection. Liana thought about the fact that they were holding it for the first time, and she realized that the words about someone doing something for the first time had been coming to her ears a lot lately. Last night, Henry had tearfully told Liana that she was his first. If one followed the stereotype, one would think that some kind of love story would follow, but that would never happen, at least not because of his restraining seal, a magical device that keeps Dorian imprisoned and vice versa, because of which he can only leave this place if he gets rid of the shackles. There is only one person who can free him, and that is the protagonist of the novel, and thanks to her, he will be able to leave this place after only 4 years. The girl didn't even know what she was in prison for, and had no idea when she would be able to get out of here. Suddenly, a man approached the girl and asked her why she was sighing and if she was dreaming of being released. It was Baron Pilatus, who had been convicted of fraud. Liana told Pilatus not to talk about her release because she felt like a real criminal. The paladin was surprised and said that she was a real criminal and asked if he could sit next to her. The protagonist replied that she wouldn't mind him keeping her company as long as he said something uplifting. Pilatus said that she should look at herself, because if he were in her shoes, he would be happy with his reflection every day. Liana replied that there was nothing to be happy about, and that she was just like everyone else, and asked if he could think of anything else. Pilatus replied that there was recent news about the Dormulites. The Dormulite Duchy is one of the 3 largest duchies in the Empire, and also the home of the main villain of this novel. Liana thought about how wonderful it would be if, even after her release, she could watch the plot unfold from the sidelines. Pilatus had said that an incident had happened to them the other day, and if before the rumor, the Dormulites had bought jewelry at an underground auction not too long ago, and among those jewels was a tiara that Her Majesty's had lost. Liana thought to herself that if it was the Empress's tiara, then it means the protagonist had found it. As soon as the rumor spread, the imperial family ordered a search of the Dormulites' estate, but the tiara was not found, and strong doubts and suspicions hung over the Dormulites. This young man is very cunning, and Pilatus was referring to the Duke of Dormulit, Chaser Louv Dormulit. Liana thought about the fact that Chaser was indeed treacherous, for he was not the main antagonist of the story for nothing. Pilatus said that the rumors didn't end there, and asked if Liana had heard about the real treasure of House Dormulit, and the rumor that Chaser Louv Dormulit had a sister. Liana knew this because the main villain's younger sister had been victimized in the name of the villain's tragic past, and the character had died of an incurable disease before the story had even begun. The girl thought about the fact that the Dormulites had stolen the Empress's tiara, just like the original plot, and everything was going so smoothly. Pilatus asked Liana why she didn't have something to tell, and so he decided to ask her if she had enjoyed the adventure she had recently talked about. Liana replied that she had enjoyed it, but there wasn't even one window in that place. Henry was sitting in his cell when suddenly Liana, who was holding bread in her hands, came to him and suggested that he go for a walk. When Henry saw her, he started barking, but the girl just smiled and said that he was in dog mode now, but he was still very handsome. No matter how many bribes Liana offered to visit this part of the prison every day, she could not return here after 3 days. The girl thought about how it was a pity that Heinrich didn't have a switch with which he could switch to human mode. Heinrich began to rumble, and Liana jokingly asked him if that was all he knew. Heinrich became silent, and the girl realized that he understood her words, but did not speak. Then she offered him bread, which she took from the kitchen. The protagonist thought that she felt as if she was feeding a stray dog. Henry began to quickly eat the treats that Liana brought, and the girl thought that the questions about food he understands well on his own quite conscious. But why then he behaves like a dog? The girl saw Henry eating quickly and told him not to hurry because he might choke, and at that moment he did choke. Liana shouted at him because she told him that he could choke if he swallowed the food, and then she took a bottle of water and started to drink it. Henry then woke up and asked her to take her hand away. Liana smiled and said that he drank well from her hand, after which Henry got very embarrassed and told her not to touch him, or she might be held responsible. Liana thought about the fact that someone else would be held responsible, more specifically the character playing the role of the protagonist. She was beautiful, kind, had special powers, and could free Henry from prison. In a word, she was the perfect girl, and thanks to her, Liana could not worry that Henry would get attached to her. The inmates of the central prison are bathed in luxury, and they had delicious food, tea parties, and outings, but this was not given to Henry. Everything is made to inconvenience only the protagonist of the novel, and it is unlikely that he dreamed of such a life. Liana said that there was no sunlight, and it was damp, but the other prisoners went for a walk once a day, and there was fresh air outside. So she suggested that Henry go for a walk with her. If this is the norm for a common criminal, it must be the same for Henry. Liana's days are boring and monotonous, but comfortable, and Henry is doomed to suffer until the protagonist appears. Henry was puzzled and asked what the walk was about, which made Liana surprised and thought to herself, "That is it really that bad?" The girl said that a walk is when you have to go outside and walk there. Henry said that he couldn't go out, and the girl asked him if he would like to go for a walk with her if he could go out, but the guy was silent. Liana said she would take his silence as a sign of agreement, but she still didn't have a plan, because the caretaker had to give permission for the walk. The protagonist had heard that the caretaker wasn't easy to get to, even if she made a request for a meeting, and she doubted she would be able to see him. Liana wondered if she would be imprisoned for being in the underground compartment for no reason, and hoped that everything would go well. The girl went to the door and said that she had requested a meeting with the caretaker, and to her surprise, Liana was led inside, and was surprised that it was easier than she expected. Liana went inside and saw that there was no one there, so she thought that maybe the caretaker had gone out for a while. She decided to sit down on the couch, and thought that she couldn't believe that she had requested a meeting with the caretaker, as if it was something important. There is a system of how this place is run, and first in the hierarchy are the guards, consisting of low and middle-ranked knights. Above them are the overbearing management knights, and then there is the management staff, and the most important among them is the warden, who also plays one of the main roles in the story. He will team up with Duke Dormulet and help him, and in the side story, it will be described for what. If Liana remembers correctly, he was in love with some girl, and in general, the character was popular with women because he was a clean guy, but with a villainous character. Suddenly, a guy walked into the room. Liana introduced herself and asked if he had an appointment with the caretaker too. The guy who walked into the room was Renag Gaze Valdez, and he was a minor character in the novel and one of the marquis of their country, and it also turned out that he was a prison warden. Suddenly, Renag turned to Liana and said that she probably wanted to see him, then sat down across from her. The girl tried to pretend that she was not surprised by this turn of events, and as if she knew everything before. Liana said that she had a request to make to the prison warden and asked if it was true that all prisoners in this prison had equal rights. Renag replied that on the face of it, it was true, and the girl thought that one would think that she had lost. But in fact, she had not. From that moment, the entrance comes the main argument for permission, because according to the rules, if a prisoner is not convicted of a serious criminal offense, he has the right to walk and do hobbies. Renag confirmed the girl's words, and Liana said that when she was chatting with other prisoners, she learned that there was a lonely guy in the dungeon of the central prison, and they say that his cell doesn't even have windows. The prison guard said that they do have such a prisoner, or she went on to say that she had heard that he was not even allowed to go for walks, but he had not committed any criminal offenses. The prison guard looked at her with an angry look and turned to the girl and said that she had no pity for the prisoner. Liana replied that it was true, and she was here to discuss it. Renag said that Liana was a very kind person, and the girl was surprised by the warden's reaction. The protagonist made an innocent look and said that, to be honest, when she hears such things about people, she always thinks of her little brother because she just can't pass by. Renag asked if the prisoner for her was an average little brother. Liana didn't really know if she had a younger brother, but nobles consider even 5th and 6th generation kin to be close, and so one younger brother, if anything, is certain to be found. The fact that it's Henry shouldn't hurt, because Henry and Renag's relationship only deteriorated when Chaser showed up. Liana had asked Renag to let Heinrich go out for a breath of fresh air, and she was pretty sure Renag would refuse. But eventually, the prison warden allowed her to spend time with Heinrich in the fresh air. The protagonist was very surprised, because she didn't expect him to agree. Renag said that for the sake of her father and brother, he would do anything she wanted. Liana couldn't understand what was going on, because at the moment, Henry was caught as a dangerous criminal, and Renag couldn't not know about it. The girl could not understand why he let Henry go so easily, knowing that he could not let him go because of Liana's father and brother. The protagonist was curious to know what they were doing, since they were so powerful that thanks to them, she could ask for any favors. Renag said that this criminal Liana was talking about was charged with a case of magical offense, and so during the walks he would be introduced to middle-rank knights and asked if that would suit Liana. The girl agreed, and the warden said that her brother had asked to make arrangements according to her requests, and so he couldn't ignore that, after which Renag offered to end the meeting and escort her out. Renag extended his hand to Liana and kissed her, and after that he said that even if he didn't make promises to her brother, he would still fulfill her request for free. And also, Renag was looking forward to seeing Liana again. When the protagonist found herself outside the door, she couldn't believe what she heard. The next day to use the permit was not possible, because the rain poured like a bucket all day, and the image of the kindest lady in the end was not needed, and the warden did not seem to realize that Liana knew him. The girl stopped her train of thought, because she had gotten what she wanted anyway, and started down into the dungeon. Hans asked if the girl was going to the prisoner again, and warned her that she should be careful today, because the prisoner was not calm for some reason. On her way to Henry's house, she noticed that there were a lot of puddles and a pungent, musty smell. At that moment, Liana heard Henry barking, which was more aggressive and louder than usual, as if he was scared of something. When Liana came to him, she realized that Henry was afraid of water. As it turned out, when Henry was still young, his father's attitude was very cruel, and Henry was tortured with water all the time. They said that he was a disgrace to the family, and as a result, he developed a fear of water, as well as a sense of worthlessness from which the protagonist would free him. Suddenly, she asked Henry if he liked the sound of the bell, because it was better than the sound of rain, and the girl also revealed that she had brought a lot of candy with her. When Henry saw them, he was very happy. Liana was pleased with herself. The girl noticed that the guy was all wet and offered to dry him a little with a towel. Liana thought about the fact that Henry might get sick in such dampness, and at that moment he took her by the hand and threw her to the ground, because of which they became too close to each other. Suddenly, the protagonist noticed a rose on Henry's body, which they say should find a couple before the rose withers. At that moment, Liana noticed as if they were getting even closer. But consciousness came to Henry at the right moment. The boy became very embarrassed and crawled back asking what it was. Liana said he should ask him because he had reached out to her first, which made Henry even more embarrassed. The protagonist concluded that he was very cute. The boy took the towel in his hands and said it was warm and soft, so he wasn't scared anymore. Liana said that you can see that he is fine, so she decided to leave. But suddenly, Henry asked her what her name was. A few days later, it was still raining like a bucket, so Liana decided to stop seeing Henry, and the girl waited for the sun to come out. The main character still couldn't recover from what had happened that day, but the main reason why she stopped going to Dorian was that she didn't receive any letters of explanation. The first thing Liana saw when she opened her eyes was a letter telling her to ask for anything she wanted. The girl asked for something, and in response to her letter always came the wish, and a new blank sheet of paper for Liana to write a new wish on, and the girl did not even immediately realize that these handouts were sent by a certain brother of Liana. And since there was no letter, so she had nothing else to bribe the guards. Usually the letter was at best on the 2nd day of the month, and at worst on the 5th. But it's been 12 days, and the letter is still not there. The girl began to worry that maybe something had happened to her brother, or she was asking for too much, and that was why she was getting annoyed. Liana sat and thought about it as suddenly Pallidus came to her and asked her what she was thinking, or maybe something had happened. When Liana saw Pallidus, she answered that nothing special had happened, and asked him what interesting news he wanted to talk about this time. Pallidus asked the girl if she had heard of Countess Andrea. It was the woman who fainted during a fit of hysteria, and it happened 4 days ago. Pallidus said that it was not just a seizure, but at that moment she received the news that Count Andrea was dead, and Duke Dormulet was to blame for it, because he was the only one who benefited from it. Count Andrea was the right hand of Archduke Henry, the red rose was Henry, and the black rose Dormulet, and they were enemies with a very long history of enmity. Count Andrea was on the side of the main character's relatives, while the other side of the main villain. The deep hatred of the sides are reinforced by the fight for the heart of the protagonist, then begins a complete confusion. In the end, Chaser kills Dorian's father, his supporters, and friends. The conflict between the two families ends with the funny thing is that Dorian didn't care about his father, but he hated Chaser anyway. The author will still play around with the characters' relationships, and it will be fun at first, and then it could be really bad. Pallidus said that Chaser Louv Dormulet is a very smart young man and can't even believe he did such a stupid thing as killing the Count Archduke. Henry won't even settle the commotion, immediately ordered the kings to get evidence on Dormulet. Eventually, Thru is now on the wanted list and must be already thinking over the plan in some secluded place, although most likely he still thought over everything before the murder. At that moment, the prison guard said that the time for talking was over and it was time for them to go back to their cell. Pallidus decided to ask what happened to Liana, and the girl said that she was waiting for a letter from her family but never received it. Pallidus replied that something urgent must have happened and that she shouldn't worry too much. The protagonist lay in her cell and thought about the fact that there was still no letter, and if she had been abandoned, what would she do after she got out of prison? Meanwhile, Chaser Louv Dormulet sat among the corpses and thought about how much he missed Liana. After a while, Pallidus came to Liana with more news, and it turned out that the culprit who had caused discord in Count Andrea's family had been identified, and Duke Henry was badly wounded. Pallidus said that his hunch was correct, and the culprit was Chaser Louv Dormulet, even if he was acting through someone other than himself. Liana remembered that before he killed Dorian's father, Chaser had made several assassination attempts, and the old man had suffered the consequences until the last attack had taken his life. And if Liana was not mistaken, that event would happen soon. The girl thought about visiting Dorian today. Pallidus said that it was probably a good thing that Dormulet had ended up being the culprit, because they had a lot of Chaser supporters in their prison, and if Chaser was suspected of committing a crime, the whole crowd of followers would go berserk. Liana asked how that was a good thing. Pilatus replied that it seemed like the lurking Duke Dormulite had finally returned, and Pilatus thought he was a resourceful young man, and he would like to meet him one day. But he was ambivalent because he didn't know if it was safe. At this point, Liana started to leave and asked why he wanted to meet him, because she would prefer not to see him even from afar. And anyway, it was not easy to see him. Pilatus said that the world is full of surprises, so life is interesting. The main character was going to the prison cell, and she was handed a letter, and after she opened it, she saw that there was something written there, because usually there were empty sheets. In the letter was a brother asking how her dear sister was doing, and Liana thought about how to answer him. In the end, Liana decided to write that alcohol and cigarettes were luxuries, and so she asked him to send more of everything. When Chaser read the letter to the girl, he ordered the alcohol to be sent to Cambracum because her sister's wish was the law. The rain had finally stopped, and that was good. Liana was sitting in Renog's office in anticipation of the meal. 10 minutes ago, Liana had been told that the warden was looking for her, and when she arrived, she was in for a pleasant surprise. Renag presented the protagonist with a gift of beautiful earrings, which Liana's brother had sent her. Renag also told her that Liana's brother had told her not to reveal her last name. At that moment, the girl realized why everyone called her by her first name, but she didn't understand why, and thanked Renag for his concern. The warden was very surprised at the girl's kindness, and said that unlike her relatives, she was very kind to him. Liana smiled and replied that they were actually good people. The warden said nothing, but said that the rains had stopped, so the prisoner Liana was talking about would soon be able to go out for his first walk. But as they had agreed, he would be introduced to the middle-class knights. According to the story, the warden would be a douche in front of his lover, although it would be very hard to imagine. The next day, Sally, who was an inmate of the central prison, said that the weather was nice today and they hadn't been out for a long time. Sally turned to Liana and asked what the knights of the elite regiment had forgotten here, and they were only assigned to particularly dangerous criminals. Dorian was restrained by magical shackles, and the knights weren't treating him very friendly. The protagonist was angry because Renag did not take care of her request well, because such a walk could hardly be called a walk, and how such a walk was better than sitting in a cell. At that moment, Liana noticed Dorian looking in her direction, but for some reason ignored her. Sally came in and said that she had gotten information about what was going on, and it turned out that Dorian was involved in a crime involving magic, and that was why he was being presented with such an elite security detail. Liana looked angry, and Sally asked why she seemed so irritated lately. Liana was angry and thought about the fact that she was trying so hard for him and ended up only getting ignored, and decided to find out what was wrong. Dorian was sitting on his knees in front of Liana, and the girl asked why he was suddenly blushing if she hadn't even done anything yet. The girl thought about the fact that at least he was okay, and said that if he didn't want to explain anything, there was no need to do so. The guy took Liana by her fingertips and asked why she didn't come to him for so long, because he was waiting for her, but she didn't come. Liana answered that she had nothing left to pay for the passage, and Dorian asked if this was the last time she was coming here. The girl asked why he thought it was the last time she came here, and noticed that Dorian was trembling, and was surprised that he was so afraid of being abandoned again. The protagonist asked him if he enjoyed the walk because it was hers, and then she wiped Dorian's tears and suggested that they go for a walk together next time. Dorian was very embarrassed and asked what he should call her. The girl answered that he could call her by her first name, but since she would be taking him for a walk, he should call her mistress. Dorian was very surprised, but the girl said she was just kidding and warned him not to ignore her anymore. Liana said she had to go now and stroked Dorian's head. After a while, Dorian and Liana got out for a walk together, and the knights asked the girl if she was the one who had requested a walk together, and it was very nice of her to take care of even a dangerous criminal. Liana greeted Dorian and asked if he was comfortable in the shackles, and then thought about the fact that most likely everyone here believes that Dorian is convicted for using forbidden magic, but only Renag knows the truth about his identity. Liana looked at his shackles and asked the knights that she wouldn't believe they were ordinary. At that moment, a knight yanked on them, and the rope glowed with a blue light, and Dorian fell to the ground. The knight explained that these shackles are used against criminals who possess magic, and the rope on them suppresses mana. So when the mana in the body is out of order, it is enough to yank, and the criminal will be suppressed. Liana thanked the knight for the explanation, but inside she was angry because he had hurt Dorian. The knight said that she probably shouldn't have shown it, because it's still not an easy scene to witness, especially for a young noblewoman. Liana turned around to see if Dorian was all right, and she noticed that there was something wrong with him because he was very angry. Dorian started fighting with the knights and the captain of the guard. Anton said he was probably having a mana surge. The knights tried to activate the rope and ordered Dorian to stop, but the rope didn't work. The protagonist was surprised that he had such power because she thought he was just an innocent puppy. But in fact, he was a real beast. Liana touched the rope, and magically the rope started to work again, and the captain of the guard told her to order Dorian to stop. The main character panicked and ordered Dorian to sit, and the guy obeyed her command. Liana was very surprised because he's not a real dog after all, but he still listens to her command. Liana kept giving different commands and couldn't understand what a stupid situation was because Dorian was scratching his ear with his foot like a real dog. The captain of the guard, Anton, seeing all this, asked the girl if she was a witch, and Liana said if she was a witch, she would be here now. The protagonist looked around, and luckily no one was around because she didn't want anyone to see this performance. Dorian touched Liana, and the girl ordered him to give a front paw, and he did. The protagonist could not understand why the protagonist became like an animal, because it was not described in the book. Anton told Liana that she had to meet the Warden Stewart, and the girl thought that it was a pity that she couldn't turn a blind eye. Anton said that Stewart wasn't there right now, so Liana should go back to her room, and when he showed up, Anton would take her to him immediately. Liana asked what they would do about Dorian's prisoner, and Anton said that first they needed to find out why their shackles hadn't worked. Liana asked if such situations had happened before, and Anton admitted that it was the first time they had used the shackles, and he had never heard anyone talk about them not working, and it was strange that even after the screaming, nothing had worked. The protagonist thought about the fact that she had been feeling weak and a little suffocated since the morning Anton noticed it, and asked the girl if she was all right. At that moment, Dorian walked up to Liana and hugged her from behind, looking menacingly at Anton. Liana removed his arm and ordered him to lie down, and Anton, who saw this, asked Liana to take Dorian back to his cell. When Dorian was taken to the cell, he asked Liana to come back quickly. Suddenly, the girl sat down on the floor and apologized for not knowing things would take such a turn when she asked to take him outside. Liana asked if he had enjoyed the walk even a little bit, though she didn't know how he could have enjoyed anything under the circumstances. But maybe at least he had experienced one positive emotion. Dorian took the girl's hand and told her that he enjoyed everything and didn't need to apologize. At that moment, the guy noticed Liana's stare and told him not to look at him like that, and the girl said she couldn't wait for him to regain his sanity. Liana also told him not to be careful with her because she had helped with his rampage today, and it was dangerous enough after that. The girl asked him if he remembered anything that happened to him in beast mode. Dorian replied that in general he remembered everything except minor details. Liana asked him if he meant that he wanted to continue walking and that he was glad that they were wrong in their actions. Also, the girl asked Dorian to smile at her if he was grateful. Dorian was very embarrassed because Liana had covered him with a blanket, and the girl said that if he didn't like the way she touched him, she didn't have to. The guy touched Liana's hand and said that he was satisfied with everything and asked her to promise that she would come to him again. At the same time, in the capital in Renag's office, the knights were reporting to him the situation that happened today. Renag asked if Dorian had injured Liana, and the knight replied that he had not injured her, and if he believed the report, she was just tired. The overseer became angry and ordered an immediate clarification of this. At that moment, a servant arrived and said that Chaser Louv Dormulite had arrived. Reneg said that he would meet him personally and ordered that Liana be sent medicine and that his schedule be rearranged so that he could return to the prison in a few days. A few days later, Liana was walking outside with Dorian and playing ball. The girl noticed that Dorian really liked receiving praise. Anton asked Liana to help with the walks because they hadn't yet found other ways for restraint, and the walks should continue on a regular basis, at least until the warden returned from his business trip. The protagonist thought that after all the turmoil they would have gotten me off the walkout altogether, but she was glad that wasn't the case. The order is an order, but it still caused the guards problems, although they, in my opinion, forgot that Dorian is a human being, and their attitude to him was like a dog that must be walked. But in the end, Liana agreed to help. Anton came to Liana and thanked her for her help, and promised to put in a good word about her services to the caretaker. Anton also said that Renag had mentioned that he was coming to the prison today, and then he left. Meanwhile, Dorian woke up, or she invited him to sit down next to her because it was better than sitting on the ground. The guy was confused and sat in the girl's arms, but the girl said she meant for him to sit next to her. Dorian tired, very embarrassed, and he apologized, after which he took the girl in his arms and sat on his lap. Renag, who at that moment arrived at the prison, saw this picture, and after that he went to the drill. The next day, Liana was sitting in the keeper's office, and Renag was surprised when he was told that Liana had made a pet out of the prisoner. The protagonist interjected what he meant, but suddenly the caretaker asked if she had discussed what was going on here. Liana replied that she hadn't discussed anything with him, so she thought that he didn't know and that he didn't even know much about her life. The main character asked so often for alcohol and cigarettes that she thought that maybe her brother imagines her to be an alcoholic. However, Liana didn't even know her relatives and will only find out when she gets out of prison. Renag said that Liana didn't seem to have changed her mind about her wish, and in that case, walking would be allowed in the future. Liana was very surprised and asked why he had decided so if the prisoner had been very violent during the last walk. The keeper replied that he only allowed it because Liana wanted it, but he was still amazed at how she treated him like a dog. The protagonist thought that Renag seemed to take it for granted that Dorian was being treated without proper respect, and whether it was worth it to get confirmation of that thought, and he also asked about her brother's opinion. Liana said that relations between her family and this prisoner's family were not particularly good. Renag said that was true, and was very surprised that Liana was interested in marrying for the sake of the alliance. At the moment, the nobles of the empire are divided into two groups, namely the Henry faction, to which the Henry family and their followers belong, and the Dormulite faction, that is, the main villain. Renag, as a representative of his family, is on the neutral side, but as a person supports the Dormulites, and it is strange to hear such a thing from Renag. Suddenly, the protagonist realizes that Leon's family belongs to the Dormulite faction. At this point, Renag asked Liana how she should spend her time with the prisoner, and if she liked informal conversations, he could have them with her alone. Liana still didn't understand what Renag meant. Renag was the assistant to the main villain who was in love with Liana in the story. Renag turned to Liana and told her that he hoped she would be comfortable with them and that she should remember that the most important thing was her safety, and as long as she remembered that, she could do whatever she wanted. The protagonist thought about the fact that there are a lot of Dormulite supporters in the prison, and that it is obviously not good for Dorian, and Liana's family are also on the side of the villains. The girl now understood why Renag condescends to her despite his nature because they are fellow villains. At that moment, the protagonist noticed that it was raining and assumed that Dorian must be shivering in his cell, so she decided to visit him. The protagonist went down into the dungeon and noticed a knight near Dorian's cell, and there was an unusually strange atmosphere. When the knight saw Liana, he said that today she was ahead of another visitor. The protagonist began to worry that something bad had happened, and that's why she felt uncomfortable. The knight said that Liana should refuse to visit the prisoner today, and the girl replied that everything was fine, and whatever she saw there would remain a secret. Eventually, the girl gave the knight a pack of cigarettes and said that she could be trusted, and then she went to the cell and noticed that there was a very acrid odor coming from there. It turned out that Dorian had been beaten, and Liana rushed to him. The book mentioned that the protagonist was often abused by his father, and it made sense that Dorian had been visited by his father. The protagonist felt very sorry for the guy, and she rushed into his arms and decided that she couldn't just leave it like that, because the guards wouldn't provide medical help. Liana ran out of the cell and said that she would be back soon, but actually she didn't know what to do because she didn't have any medicine, and the only option was to write to her brother. The protagonist asked her brother for some medicine to treat her wounds, and surprisingly and fortunately, after a few days, everything arrived. Liana went to Dorian, and Hans said he could let the girl through with the medicine, but asked why she cared so much about him. The protagonist replied that she didn't want to see Dorian in that position. The girl noticed that now he had a damaged eye, and it was already an unusual wound, so she told Dorian that she had come to treat him, and it would probably hurt, so he would have to be patient. After a while, the Liana wiped off all the blood, and now a healing ointment had to be applied. When the Liana finished her work, she looked at Dorian and smiled. The guy asked why the girl was smiling, or she replied that she was smiling because he was prettier than her. Dorian wanted to object, saying that she was prettier, but after his words, he was immediately embarrassed. Liana looked at the work done and said, well, it wasn't broken, but only the shoulders and neck were left. The girl looked at the remaining medicines her brother had sent her and didn't know what to do with them because there were all sorts of medicines, like colds or even burns. The protagonist thought about the fact that she had a very caring brother and her level of affection for him grew. Chaser Louv Dormulite read Liana's letter for him to send medicines that would be suitable for treating wounds and thought that maybe he should look into Kumbrakum more often. Meanwhile, Liana had applied an anesthetic ointment to all the parts of his body where the wounds were, and now Dorian needed to take the medicine. But the problem was that he didn't know how to do it. The guy asked that if it was bad to take medicine, or she was surprised that he was given it for the first time. The protagonist said that first he should take a glass of water in his hands, swallow the pill, and then drink it all with water. Even after the instruction, Dorian failed to take the pill, and so Liana decided that she needed to teach him how to do it. The girl decided to help him since he couldn't do it on his own, and told him to open his mouth and put the pill in it and told him to drink water. After that, Liana quickly left, saying that she had to leave early today. After a while, Liana noticed that there was a note in the letter from her brother, saying that he was very worried about her sister and missed her very much, and asked if he should visit her. The protagonist was very surprised because usually prisoners don't get along with their families, because as a rule, it is the relatives who are to blame for getting people here. Some have accepted the fact of being in prison, and some have not, and that's why anger and rejection have seized their souls, and such feelings prisoners have towards their relatives because they got here. Liana assumed that perhaps her brother was being nice to her out of pity, and she wondered what their relationship had been like before she went to prison. A month later, Dorian's wounds were completely healed, and Liana brought him cookies, which made him very happy. Suddenly, the protagonist noticed that the seal on Dorian's neck looks bigger than usual, and it's been almost 3 months since the first meeting with the main positive hero of the novel. Liana was eating cookies together with Dorian, and suddenly one of the cookies was swimming, and the guy wanted to pick it up from the ground. But Liana didn't let him do it because she wanted to preserve the remnants of his human dignity. The girl decided to distract him and showed him the book she had brought for him because she wanted to attend to his development. To begin with, it would be reasonable to just talk to him about the words because he couldn't read, but Dorian didn't even try to do that. Liana decided not to torture him and just read him a story. The story was about how a girl finally met her cursed prince, and the prince was bitten by a dragon, after which his face turned black and his clothes burned with bright flames. The protagonist noticed how Dorian listened to her attentively, though only a couple of minutes ago he could hardly sit still. The girl asked the prince if something hurts him, but the prince said that the girl should not worry, and because of these words the girl cried and thought about what the prince feels now, because he is probably very hurt, but he hides it. The girl defeated the evil dragon, and then she took the prince's hand and there was no trace of his curse. If you think about it, Dorian the prince is a fairy tale only locked not in a castle, but in a cage. And the main character is a fallen aristocrat that will also be freed from the curse and will live happily ever after with his princess. Suddenly, she asked Dorian if he knew that she had an older brother and he would probably be coming to the prison soon. Liana hoped that he would be as cute as Dorian, and if he was bad, at least he would be handsome. In any case, Liana didn't want to introduce Dorian to her brother and hoped he wouldn't just pay a visit, but get her out of here. Dorian had eaten the last cookie, or she had said it was time for her to leave, which made the guy very upset. Her brother had promised to visit Liana, but it hadn't happened yet, and the girl thought that those were just words, and she couldn't think about anything else lately. The protagonist looked at her reflection in the puddle and thought that if he looked like her, then he was unearthly handsome. Liana is really beautiful after all. The girl assumed that villains in general do not walk around with pink hair, and so she decided to lower her expectations. Suddenly, The protagonist remembered that her brother wasn't around, even when Liana's heart stopped beating. Because the first time Liana opened her eyes in this body was in the prison infirmary. It turned out that Liana had had a heart attack, and her body was so weak that she immediately fainted after those words. It was only hours later that she opened her eyes again, but it was already in the prison cell. Interestingly enough, she never once felt sick after the attack. After waking up, Liana immediately realized that the real Liana had died, as if someone had whispered it in her ear. It was strange. At the same moment, Liana thought she would just continue to live her life as if nothing had happened, looking forward to the end of her sentence. The protagonist had a feeling that something incredible was waiting for her outside the prison, but there was no point in worrying about that right now. At that moment, a guy came up to Liana and said that she looked bored. It was the first time the girl had seen this guy, and besides, he was wearing a prison uniform, but in a different color. The guy said that today the prisoners from the other building are also walking here, or she noticed that today there are more prisoners than usual. The guy told Liana not to be afraid of him because he had no intention of harming her, and then introduced himself as Jir. Suddenly, the protagonist realized that it was Jer Yuta Tupenfos who was a minor character in the book, and he was the one who helped Dorian and the protagonist escape from prison. Jer told Liana to relax because she looks too tense. Besides, a lot of guards are away on a business trip together with the Warden, so there is almost no surveillance and no constantly pressing eyes behind the walk. After that, the guy offered Liana to take a walk together and told her not to worry because the head of their corps personally selects people who can go outside. Liana was surprised, and it turned out that only adequate people can go out for a walk. Jer admitted that he had only seen Liana from a distance before, and he enjoyed watching the human training by the way. Leona said that she was in an area inaccessible to the other enclosures, so there was no way he could see her. The guy admitted that he had briefly escaped from prison, and that's when he saw this picture. In the novel, Jir was not only the left-hand man that helped Dorian escape, but he was the right-hand man and loyal assistant that pretended to be a criminal to carry out the plan. First and foremost, he is the supreme magician at Henry's side. Jir said that he was the one who took an interest in Liana when he saw her with that young man, and in fact, he is actually a sorcerer. The guy hoped that Liana knew about sorcerers' tendency to pay attention to things that were curious to them. The protagonist asked if mages were not sent to a separate prison, and if he was really a mage, he wouldn't tell anyone about it. The guy said that really only Liana knows about it, and besides, from this second, the guards won't remember anything that happened in the last 5 minutes because the guy took care of them. Jer said he wanted to tell Liana something funny about the prisoner she was worried about. Liana thought about the fact that this man was described in the novel that his character was not so simple, and now Liana felt it personally. Jir said that Dorian is constantly barking because he is cursed with a curse that turns him into a beast, and the curse is very old and ordinary people probably haven't even heard of it. Not many people know about Henry's family's curse, and it's understandable why he explains it to Liana, but Liana was the only one who knew everything. The protagonist was wondering why Jir was telling her about it. The guy said that because of this curse, when he becomes an animal, he can't speak a human word, and it's very uncomfortable, and that's why Jir grants awakening to those who suffer from this kind of curse as a temporary measure. Of course, he takes responsibility for it. Liana asked why she needed this information, and the guy replied that he assumed she might be interested based on his observations of her prisoners not yet awakened. If nothing is done about turning into a monster, he will wreak havoc on a permanent basis. Liana thought that meant that Dorian couldn't speak properly, not because of his long time away from society, and regretted that she had yelled at him. But in the book, even as a monster, he still spoke human, and probably because he had been awakened by Jir. Liana asked what the mage wanted from her, since she doubted he'd come just to tell her about Dorian's diagnosis. Jir said that he thought he had a very inquisitive girl in front of him, and he wanted his magical interest to be piqued because he was a magician who knew the cure for awakening, and Liana was the one who had to feed the cure to Dorian. Jir couldn't wait to start learning something because he hadn't done it in a long time. Liana thought about the fact that he says that, but he needs the spell to reach Dorian, and the girl couldn't understand why he chose her. The girl was sure that the guy had tons of possibilities, and if it was the fact that Liana was the most available option, and besides, Jer was strangely aggressive and Liana didn't like it. The protagonist asked why she would do it, and the guy said that in return he could fulfill any of her requests, and opportunities to enlist the help of a magician don't come along very often. A good magic spell for all the gold, and yet Liana has no restrictions on her choices. It was a very tempting deal for Liana, but would she ever be able to use this spell? The protagonist was sure that once she got out of prison, she would have a life without worries and problems, and decided to back out. Jer decided to remind her that if she agrees, the prisoner will stop eating, sleep, and become human, and in general, he will stop causing such problems. Hearing this, Liana decided that she couldn't refuse him and asked him what exactly was required of her. The guy said that she didn't really have to do anything, just to make sure that the spell he'd created hit Dorian. Jer would put the spell into a medium that Liana would have to feed to Dorian, and when she did so, she would have to touch the prisoner and the spell would activate. Jer then said that Liana should reach out her hand to him and they should touch, because the closer they are, the better the magic spreads. Liana asked if he had prepared for this in advance, and Jer replied that he knew Liana would agree by simple analysis. After Jer finished that, on Liana's hand appeared, and the guy said that the spell had to be activated at night under the moonlight. Liana asked how she would be able to accomplish this task, since it was not in her power to walk around the prison at night. Jer told Liana not to worry, because he had already thought of everything in advance and gave her a magic bracelet to use. Liana said that even if the bracelet could help her, how exactly, and if it would harm the prisoner. Jer replied that it wouldn't, but there would be a small side effect, and it shouldn't be anything supernatural, just a sudden growth spurt. But after a while, it would go back to normal. Jer said that it's time for him to go and they'll see Liana soon. The protagonist decided that it was still worth trying to pull off this scam. When night fell, Liana decided to go and help Dorian. Liana loves to sleep, and even if someone decides to kidnap her while she sleeps, she won't wake up. So if Liana needs to go somewhere deep at night or early in the morning, she doesn't go to sleep. Of course, the cameras are guarded at night, but there are fewer guards than in the central building, and in the morning there are almost no guards as everyone is asleep. The nobles are used to being active late at night and sleeping in the daytime, since there are no social evenings in the prison. They go to bed early but wake up late anyway. Just during this period, the knights enjoy what Liana gave them. The protagonist thought about the fact that there are 5 guards at most, but usually there are 4, and decided to use the bracelet at once. Jer gave Liana 3 spells, and the first spell is invisibility. The second spell is to open all locked doors. The spell is done so that if Liana can see everything around her at the same time, the people around her can't see her. The protagonist used the invisibility spell to avoid being seen by the knights. Liana wondered why the warden had returned so early, and it turned out that it was a very busy time in the capital, so it was no wonder that he was traveling and visiting the prison more and more often. But why? Liana decided that if Renag was back, she needed to be very careful. Liana saw that Renag was back, and so she needed to act very careful. As the protagonist passed by the sleeping Hans, she realized that Hans was a kind and pleasant man, but also calculating, because he was the one who came to Dorian's aid when he was wounded. Suddenly, the knight woke up, but the girl hoped he hadn't heard her, but to her disappointment, he started searching for her. In order not to risk it, she decided to use magic, even though she had to be careful. Still, direct contact should have been enough for it to affect Hans. The knight clutched his neck in pain, and after a while he was lying unconscious on the floor, which was clearly to the protagonist's advantage. She remembered that this was the last spell Jer had taught her, the sleep spell, which made her feel proud of herself that it had worked. Without thinking, she walked over to the cage to open it, but suddenly she heard Dorian's voice. He spoke to her without hesitation or stuttering, which startled her, because the invisibility spell was still active. Though she didn't understand how Dorian knew of her presence, Liana decided to dispel her magic. Dorian was surprised by her presence, and meeting at night was even more pleasant than Dorian could argue with. He hadn't expected to see her at such a late hour, but his gut feeling was that the sun had already set. If you pay attention, you can realize that he is very smart and intelligent, and the protagonist would have loved to talk to him longer. But they had to hurry up, and he started stuttering again. She came here to give him something, and if he eats it, something unusual will happen to him in a good way. It's very hard for a normal person to meet a real magician when he's offered enchanted food. He wouldn't believe it. Besides, Jer had asked her not to tell him all the details. Liana thought that he wouldn't risk it, but he didn't ask what it was and why he should eat it. He read that there was no need for it. The protagonist got angry because you can't be so careless. It's not even a matter of trusting her because if it was another person, he would have eaten it all anyway. She explained to him that he should not just agree to everything that is offered, and especially when it comes to food. But Dorian didn't understand the problem because she had said to eat it. But still, another person could have come instead of her, and most likely with bad intentions. The guy couldn't believe that she would hurt him, but after a while his thoughts changed in the opposite direction. Even though Liana didn't want to hurt him, he still didn't need to trust her so blindly. She would be on his side today, but no one knows what will happen next time. Since time was short, she insisted he eat it faster. The protagonist asked Jer to sweeten it because after the effect works, the burning pain will make itself felt, like giving a child candy before a shot. But still, the protagonist didn't understand why he trusted her so blindly because he shouldn't be so naive, and at that moment she felt strange. But she had to cast a spell in her head yesterday, and Dorian felt a lot of pain, even though Jer had said it would only hurt a little. She didn't know what to do now. Since calling security was a bad idea, she decided to give him a painkiller. But suddenly, he grabbed her arm, and she remembered that this medicine had a small side effect. Dorian asked her directly why she was avoiding him, which shocked the protagonist. Liana asked him to let her go, but he stood his ground and asked her not to leave anymore, which she thought was more like the main effects than the side effects. Not at that moment she realized that Jer had tricked her. But still now she made sure that this was the Dorian she had read about in the book. She would look like this in 4 years. The girl kept asking him to let her go, but he wasn't even close to doing that. But then Liana noticed that the same bag with sweets was left near her, and calling him a good boy, she offered to take all the cookies for herself. But Dorian just ignored it and asked what to call her because he forgot what the main character didn't know what to say. He offered to call her mistress, but the girl was strongly against it, and so that in the future she would never joke with him again. She asked him to call her by her name, Liana, but he suddenly put his hand on her breast and pulled her hand to the pouch to feed it, but she was against it because it hurt her. When Dorian called her by her name, she felt it started to sound rather strange. Since the guy wanted cookies, he had to let her go because only then she could feed him, which he agreed to. Liana was embarrassed, so she asked him to stop doing that, but the guy couldn't stop himself from eating because the cookies were too delicious. Because of that, he wanted the protagonist to feed him another one, but she doesn't like people who do whatever they want. While the girl didn't realize what was going on, he suddenly hugged her from behind, apologizing, causing her back to feel hot. But suddenly, Dorian's whole body started to ache, which made the girl angry because he should have told her right away. The boy confessed that no one had ever cared about him like she did, and if she said the cookies were his, he thought she belonged to him too. But before he could kiss her, Dorian fainted, which surprised the protagonist. When Liana covered him, he asked her not to leave, but she left her soft rubber band and left, because she had to ask Jer what had just happened. 3 days later, it was a day since Dorian had been awakened. The walks and visits were over and the new shackles were tried on him. Liana was sitting in the park, but when Jason saw her, he decided to ask her if she was all right because she didn't look well and suggested that she go to the infirmary. But Liana politely declined. Suddenly she blushed, but still stood her ground, and then the night left. There was no way the protagonist could switch to anything else but that situation, but suddenly she heard a familiar voice saying that she felt the magic activate. As it turned out, it was Jer. And after finally waiting for him, she pounced on him to answer her questions, because she didn't understand why the prisoner had gotten sick after the spell. It was because of the sudden change. Even normal people would feel pain if they grew suddenly. But Liana thought it was easy for him to say that he didn't suffer from it and was about to leave. But Jer asked her to stop and apologized, because he didn't want to belittle the problem and he can't tell everything. But what she did was very important to him, for which he was very grateful to her. The owner of the prison, who had recently been flitting between the prison and the capital, had returned to work, which meant that she had completed a task of great difficulty, especially considering that he was a special danger to mages. But still, the mage thought that the meeting with the prisoner was not so bad. But the girl did not sleep for several nights after the incident, because before her, it was terrible. Besides, she didn't understand why Dorian had become so huge, so she briefly described everything that had happened that night. Jair asked her not to worry about it. It was only temporary, and the situation was an indication that his body had adapted quickly to magic, so there was a positive side to it. The protagonist asked if this meant that it would not happen again in the future, to which she received an affirmative answer. But still, she was preparing for the worst-case scenario, when Liana was walking the prisoner. The mage sensed how close they were to each other, and that's why he chose her, because people with a curse like that trust people so easily, and she was kind to him, so he wanted to know why she was doing this. After a while, Sally ran up to the protagonist to tell her that all the girls, the prisoners, were worried because a handsome visitor had come like that. Sally said that they say that he is not even comparable to the most handsome guard in their prison, Jerops, and maybe this visitor will leave soon. Sally suggested Liana to look at the visitor with her because she was very curious. Viscountess Aisha came out of the cafeteria and saw a big black carriage, which is for guests, but for criminals the carriage is blue. According to her, when she saw who was coming out of the carriage, her first thought was that she had never seen such a gorgeous man before. Viscount Aisha is the girl who was imprisoned because of a scandal with a nobleman 20 years younger than her, and her husband sent Aisha to prison to cool her head. Sally said that Aisha is a fine artist, and so she decided to draw the man she saw. When the drawing was ready, everyone around admired how incredibly beautiful the man was. So Sally was very interested to see this man, and since she wanted to so badly, she agreed to go for it. Suddenly, Liana's personal guard Jason came running in and told Liana to come with him immediately because the warden wanted to see her. Liana wondered why the warden would call her, or maybe her brother sent her something again. There shouldn't be any other reason. When she went to the warden, she saw a crowd of girls and decided to ask Jason why there were so many people there. Jason said that apparently Liana knew about the new guest and had heard that he wasn't the last person in the house, but he didn't give any details. Jason suggested that Liana go another way if she didn't like the noise, and the girl agreed. The protagonist noticed only a black suit and thought that maybe this was the guy Sally was talking about. Suddenly, a knight came running in, calling out for Jason because the statue had fallen apart. Jason apologized to Liana and asked her not to say anything to the caretaker about what she had heard. When Jason left, Liana was alone, and suddenly she felt something, and then a voice came from behind her and greeted her. But when the girl turned around, she didn't see anyone there. At that moment, Jason came running and apologized for the fact that Liana waited so long for him. The protagonist went to the warden's office and thought something she heard she just imagined. Chaser and the little mage stood there looking at Liana. The mage asked why Chaser didn't want to talk to her, and Chaser said it wasn't time yet, because she would be here for a while. Chaser said that he would see her soon anyway, or should I say he would be reunited with her anyway, and Liana had to be patient for a while. After a while, Jair asked Liana why she was fiddling with Dorian, and for him, he was great material for research, and he was curious what Liana's goals were. Actually, Liana just felt sorry for Dorian, but she wouldn't tell Jair that. And so she decided to say that she was helping him because Dorian was handsome. The guy was very surprised, and told Liana to let Dorian know about his condition after her next meeting with him. The girl said that she would have no problem doing that, but the question was whether they would meet again. Jair said he was a mage and had his own ways of communicating. As Liana sat in Renag's office, she remembered Jair's words and thought about whether the silhouette in the hallway could have been Renag. Liana said she had heard that Renag was leaving the prison for a couple days. Renag replied that it was, and right now there was something going on in the capital that needed his attention, and so he might have to leave again. At that moment, Liana remembered the conversation between the two knights, that Renag had come back so early because of the busy times in the capital. And it was no wonder that he was traveling all the time, and that he was visiting the prison more and more often. The girl thought that perhaps she was more comfortable here, and Renag said that perhaps she was saddened. The girl thought about what she might be sad about with a goodie in her hands, but it turned out that her brother was coming here. Liana was very surprised when she heard that, and Renag said that he wanted to see her, but for sudden reasons he had to leave urgently, and if he understood correctly, something had happened at the family estate. Renag said that in the end, there is nothing unusual here, because this is Liana's family we are talking about. Liana's family is under Dormulet's supervision, and Chaser is far from stupid and capable of the most devious plans. The only question is whether it's good or bad that Liana's brother is under supervision. The protagonist would like to know what her brother looks like, because he probably has the same pink hair as she does. And besides, not only do they know what he looks like, then she has not been able to find out his name yet. Liana asked when she would have a chance to meet her brother. Renag said that he had left her something, namely a most beautiful bouquet of jeweled flowers and a letter that was in them. The letter said that her brother hoped that the small gift was enough for her to forgive him for the failed meeting, and that these beautiful roses would never wilt, because he knew that the sight of wilted roses would make her sad, and he didn't want Liana to be sad, and the letter also said that he would come back for her soon. The main character wondered how rich her family was if this bouquet of jeweled flowers was a small gift, and if it was normal to send such a thing to a prison. Liana asked if she could take them with her. Renag replied that it was against the rules, but that if she made a small exception it would be okay, and the flowers were too pretty for Liana. Liana said it looked like her family wasn't starving because the gifts didn't look cheap, and she wondered how easy they were to break. Renag said that everything seemed to be going smoothly, and that Liana's brother was doing a good job as always, and Renag would make sure that no one dared touch her gift. The girl thought about the fact that Renag thinks that the girl is worried that this bouquet of flowers might be stolen. Suddenly, Renag asked to ask Liana one question, namely if she was not curious why her brother sent her here. The protagonist thought about it, and as soon as her brother did it, she thought that he must have a special reason, because he is not the kind of person who does things for nothing, and this is confirmed by the gift sent to her. Maybe Liana's brother is acting out of guilt or for some other reason, but it's hard to come to one conclusion. Renag said that Liana probably trusts her brother very much, because he's not a bad person anyway. Liana thought that Renag seemed to know her brother well. Suddenly, Renag moved closer, and Liana asked if they had to talk so close. Renag became very embarrassed and changed for his behavior and moved away from Liana. Suddenly, the protagonist thought about why Renag wears a monocle and has poor eyesight. The warden replied that it wasn't that, and that he just liked the way he looked in it. Liane thought that maybe her relatives had asked Renag to be nice to her, but I think he was kind, and it was strange because he was not like that in the book. Now Liana wanted to know more and more what her family was like, and was very curious. Pilatus noticed that Liana had a very serious expression on her face and decided to ask her what was wrong. The girl replied that she was worried about something and said that she had one interesting proposal for Pilatus. Liana called it a game and said that she would ask him questions and he would have to answer them. Suddenly, Sally came in with Sally and said she wanted to participate in this game too, and Liana agreed. Sally is socially very experienced, and so is the Baron. Liana said that her family was of definite interest, and if they had any guesses where her parents were from, and asked them to guess the answer and their answers, while their answers would not be accurate information, at least they would have some. Liana felt like she had enough patience to find out everything when she got out, but the question was whether she would get out of here at all. If her family ended up really connected to the villain, things might not end well, and she wanted to just get out of prison and live her life in peace.